So yesterday we talked about when there is a sense of fixation, contraction, density around our center or around our emotional experience, perhaps. Today I just wanted to talk a little bit about more practical work with emotions as they come up, move through, and so forth. As I wrote in my book, I find there's a big spectrum of how any given individual processes, experiences, emotions. And maybe I had the opportunity in this lifetime to sort of move through that spectrum and understand a lot of nuances about this. But on one end of that spectrum, an emotion is something that is very conceptual, heady, it perhaps enmeshed, has a lot to do with a story, is not so much a felt sense or a felt experience. Strangely, one of the things that strikes me as interesting is occasionally I hear somebody say, like, clearly animals don't experience emotions, and they seem very sure of that. And I don't know for sure, but I really suspect someone who perceives that is very in their head about emotion. What emotion is, it's story, narrative based. The reason I say that is maybe I would have said that myself many years ago, but now I find animals process and express emotion very, very clearly, seamlessly, fluidly, and I resonate. There's a lot of resonance with how I feel emotion when I see the way animals emote, process energy, and so forth. So yeah, on one end of the spectrum, there's this heady, narrative-based approach to emotion or experience of emotion. On the other end of the spectrum, it would be something like rather intense, direct experience that is unmitigated by any narrative or thought, or there's no sense that I need to do something about it or with it or escape from it. It's just here. It's moving through like a weather pattern. And again, it can be surprisingly intense when we start to feel that directly. We often, not always, but often know the quality of emotion. We should be able to usually say, oh, that's something like sadness. It's in that spectrum, or anger, or perhaps fear, perhaps shame. But the label and the narrative around it is not the primary experience of the emotion. It's a very direct felt sense, and usually is very traceable in the body. Usually you're able to find where that is mapping in the body at that moment. I would say that's kind of the spectrum, and then there's a lot in between. What I've found is that there's a lot of defense mechanism built into our thought process around emotion, the narratives, storylines, and it can actually help us, in quotes, to filter out quite a bit of our own experience, the effects of our behaviors, the effects we're feeling from the behaviors of others or the environment around us. At the most extreme, it's a kind of numbness or dissociation. What's interesting is some people are hooked up such that they tend to or naturally feel so directly, so fully, that there's this kind of massive reaction formation toward dissociating because it's just an overload. It's an emotional overload. I think people on the autism spectrum tend to be this way and understand this, that emotional overload is so intense that some of the coping mechanisms that are required are things like sometimes dissociating in certain ways, stimming and all that. But I think neurotypical people are just like on the spectrum somewhere of, some mixture of a story and a narrative and a timeline and some blame and some self and other mixed in with the storyline with some feelings, some sensations. So as this unbinding process propagates, I would say we tend to move more and more toward this direct sensation, direct feeling, experience of emotion, where emotions tend to move through more rapidly, I would say, more fluidly. They feel less stuck. They feel more clear, less opaque. We're more aware. I was going to say that we have less tendency to distract, but at first that's not necessarily the case. We may even have more tendency to distract because of the intensity, but we're far more aware of distraction. We're far more aware of the mechanism that we use, or mechanisms that we use to distract ourselves when we're feeling something intense, untoward, uncomfortable, and so forth. So I think that a big part of really doing deep emotion work is learning, and the best way to learn this is non-violently, meaning don't judge yourself harshly for what you do, but learning what your coping mechanisms are and noticing the triggers for them when it comes to emotion. This can be really surprising territory, and there can be quite a bit to it when you start to unpack it and realizing how complex the emotion is simple, emoting is simple, sensation is simple, direct experience is simple, but coping mechanisms can be complex and nuanced in some sense, and confusing and complicated and so forth. The good news is the more we get into the complexity and confusion and so forth, we recognize that we're in the mind, we're in the head. And as we have more access to direct experience, we have the ability to come directly into the body or into the sensation field. But it still, I would say, behooves us to learn about ourselves, learn about our tendency to distract, dissociate, and what it is we're reacting to. Some interesting things that you may find here, a lot of interesting things, but one is that the magnitude of distraction or the magnitude of reaction you might have, to an emotion or to a situation in which a certain emotion might arise is not necessarily in proportion to the intensity of the emotion, or even the importance of the situation in your life. What I mean by that is we might think that if we have a serious, massive reaction or an internal reaction that says something like, I'm just going to kill myself before I'm going to feel this, like this is too much. That reaction may be really out of proportion. If we really look at what we're reacting to, it may be something reasonably simple, but if it's obscure, then the reaction often continues. When it's not obscure, when we can see like, oh, I'm actually just reacting to just feeling a little bit out of control, or like feeling like a little bit of what I thought was control is not really here. Or I'm feeling a little confused about something. I'm feeling unclear about what's actually occurring or what's happening, which may not be an intense emotional experience, but it is there's some emotional tone to that, some confusion, which leads us to a kind of grief, like a letting go, having to let go of that illusion of control. None of that, well, it could be that none of that is very intense actually, but the reaction can be rather intense. So one thing we may find is that the reactions we have to things may be disproportionate, and they may not even align sometimes. We may find we're habituating reaction, even if there's no particular intense emotional experience going on. It's just that we become so habituated to distraction, reaction, and so forth, that cycle can be a little challenging to break the momentum of. So making this sort of study of our own internal process with what it is that triggers and what it is we do when there's a trigger, how we react, how we respond, and there are many types of reactions. Looking at all of that can be really helpful because what I find is that when we understand our reactions and we understand when we're in reaction, not all of us are even aware of that. And any of us may be not aware of it at a given time. We don't realize we're actually in a reaction state. We don't realize we're in a distraction state. But the more we look at this, the more we can realize the difference when I'm in a reactant state and when I'm feeling a kind of fluid presence. What we'll find more and more, I think, is that the underlying emotion that, to give it a little volition, wants to come to the surface will be more and more available, is what I find. This is the kind of thing where you're not really trying to deconstruct or break a habit necessarily. You're just wanting to see it really clearly. Look at it closely, understand it with, again, nonviolence, acceptance, compassion, and curiosity. Then, like the meditation this morning, it kind of slows things down to see the mechanism. And when it slows things down, you have more access to this kind of in-between space of emotion, in between what's heady and what's directly felt, pure sensation. You'll have more access to that sort of gray area that emotion can be at times. And getting in the habit of asking yourself, what do I feel right now, can be a really, really good habit for this. What am I feeling? And the magnitude doesn't matter as much necessarily. Sometimes we'll want to qualify or justify, well, I'm not feeling intense anger, but I am feeling anger. I'm not feeling intense fear, but I am feeling some fear. That's fine, but there's not really a reason to quantify it. I kind of pick a lot of this up from James McCleary. He's really great with emotion work, and he'll say just break it down into something simple. You're feeling mad, glad, sad, fear, or shame, and that covers most subtle emotions or subtle emotional tones, right? Trepidation, angst, terror, hesitation. These are all fear. These are all on the fear spectrum, right? Maybe frustration, annoyance, irritability, aggression, rage. These are all on the anger spectrum, right? They're anger. So his point around this would be that when you're experiencing something, give yourself permission to just fully experience it. So if there's anger, just fully experience that to whatever degree it's coming or to whatever degree it is, but go right to it. Don't qualify it. Don't try to, put it in some kind of mental context, because that is going to be some degree of distraction. You're distracting with a kind of analysis almost. And when you learn to just go right to whatever the primary emotion is in the moment, then it really becomes this like tuning fork. All of the beliefs about what we don't want to feel and how intense emotions can be, and the quote unquote negative emotions, all of that's not anything to do with emotion. That's all up here. That's all in the reaction. That's in the reactivity. That's in the avoidance. That's in the distractibility. It's not in the emotion, I promise. Once you get directly into an emotional experience, it feels very different. It feels like coming home. It feels like communion with yourself. It feels like self-love. It feels like self-acceptance. It feels like, oh, there's nowhere I need to go from here. That's kind of like I'm at the root. At least at this moment, I'm at the root of what the emotional landscape of this being is right now. So the reason I say that is if you find yourself qualifying and justifying and trying to figure out what it's about and whether you should be feeling this, or that's all layers of thought. That's okay. Just pat it on the head and just really go into what am I actually feeling? Let me just go right to it, right? Let yourself feel it. It may become a physiologic experience. You may cry, tears may come, and it may not. It doesn't have to be, but go to it. And again, it may be intense and it may be subtle, but when you're really there, something in you will know, I'm here. I'm here. I'm home. And that is a portal. That coming home is a portal. I'm not going to really say what it's a portal to, not to be mysterious, but just because it fluctuates. It's different depending on what's going on. But it's a portal to wisdom, a kind of wisdom that is going to be beautifully where the relative meets the absolute, right? Maybe emotion is a really good portal into understanding relative and absolute here. Because there is the relative truth of you as a human being with physical problems and challenges and illnesses and pain and love and romance and breakups and family challenges, all of that stuff's going to be still here, of course, right? That's the sort of relative world. But how do you fully embrace the relative? Like, how can you really, really fully embrace that and not suffer? Not suffer meaning not feel like things should be other than they are, which is really what suffering is, right? Well, in my experience, step one is wake up. Without awakening, without realizing the absolute aspect, there's always going to be some degree of suffering. And for some, it'll be a lot, right? But that's number one. Number two is really to find the absolute within the relative. And this is what I'm talking about. Finding the absolute within the relative is to find home in this myriad of experiences that are both internal and external, this cacophony or kaleidoscope of all the human experiences that we have, which are challenging and satisfying and confusing and emotional and heady and physical. All of that's going on all the time, right? And there's this way to come home, to be called home, and actually it is through emotion. Through emotion, not through, again, the reactions, the distractions, the stories, narratives. That's not what I mean. I mean through the actual direct experience of attuning to what is the energy in motion for you right now. James McCleary also has this beautiful. We're going to do it in. He's going to do a workshop on it at the May retreat, but he does this beautiful workshop, I suppose, where you physically, everybody stands up and steps in and out of different archetypal energies. And he describes the barrier emotions or the portal emotions to these. And it's so beautiful because you realize like, oh yeah, that's exactly what's happening. And if you don't know what's happening, it can be really muddy. But when you do realize that these archetypal energies are something we all have access to, and they're here and they're alive. And then you realize the correlation between that archetypal energy, the wisdom that comes with it, and the emotion associated with it. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing. We did it last night, actually, a small version of it in circling, and I may do it again later in the week. But I don't do it as well as James does. But the portal emotions for these archetypes are so brilliantly true. For the magician is the archetype of transformation, right? The barrier emotion is fear, right? Fear can present as a sort of excitement, but it's definitely the energy of entering the mystery, right? Entering the complete unknown. That's that, you know, if we're entering the complete unknown and that unknown takes us beyond the identity structure, the first time, that will feel like existential terror. That will feel like the biggest fear you've ever had, in a way, right? And there's a whole spectrum of fear, of how that can come through. But it's also a way to really reprocess our understanding of fear such that we realize when we are leaning into our medicine with that archetype, we're leaning into transformation, we're leaning into creativity, there's going to be some fear. That's the emotion that's going to be there. And that's an attunement, right, to that energy, to that archetypal energy coming through us that's available to all of us. When we avoid that energy, when we avoid that emotion, then we are in our shadow there. So the portal emotion for the warrior energy, the warriors are spirit, strength, courage, energy to move forward in life and so forth. The portal emotion there is anger, right? And on and on. So with the lover, the portal emotion is grief or sadness. With the sovereign, the portal emotion is joy. So this is just one way of demonstrating or describing what I mean when I say that emotion turns out to be like a treasure chest. Like it's really man, it's so mischaracterized, I think, in our contemporary understanding. It's so mischaracterized. Again, it's like happiness, good. Every other emotion is the negative emotions. Like, that's just so cut off from our self, right? I did a death meditation recently, and death plays into all of this really beautifully. I was commenting to someone recently that, and I mentioned it, I think, in one of the talks this week, that humans, if we compare ourselves to all other animals, we live so far away from our natural state, in a way, our natural cycles and our natural processes and so forth. We live with so much distance, and this isn't right, or I'm not saying this is right or wrong. There's no moral judgment. It's just what I see. We live with so much distance and risk mitigation and safety and so forth. And there's a huge cost to that, huge psychological cost and so forth. But one thing that's very different, I would say, between the way we live and, say, what might be called a primitive culture, or maybe an Aboriginal culture, or there are a couple small groups of people in Africa that still live with like true hunter-gatherer lifestyles, nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyles. So if you were to compare the way we live to a human tribe like that, I think one of the major differences you would see is that if you're living in that environment, you're never apart from death. You see it around you all the time. You know death is close, and it's just part of life. You don't have the convenience to pretend it's not going to happen. It's not there. You see it. You cause it. When you hunt, you see injuries and death happening frequently, right, around you. There's a really interesting documentary called, I think it's called $1 a Day, or Living on $1 a Day. And it was two, I don't know if they're grad students or undergrad students, but they were trying to make some kind of model in economics for societies that live off the equivalent of $1 per day, which we would consider like abject poverty in some sense, but these are more like native cultures, right? And so they thought, well, the best way to actually experience it would be to go live with one. So I think they did it for a month, if I remember right. And they filmed it, and that was their documentary. And one of the major things they noticed at first was they were extremely uncomfortable. They're also fearful. And they were fearful that, like, wow, they're looking around going, no one has any money here. What if someone gets sick? What if someone needs surgery? Like, what's going to happen? How are they going to survive, right? There's no health insurance here. There's not even food reserves here, really. People are living just day to day and so forth. They noticed that about themselves, and they also noticed that when they're looking around at everybody, no one else seems to be living in that fear that they're living. That people actually seemed rather joyful, pretty present, actually. And they noticed this right away. And then with time, I think it was about a week or so, their own internal reaction to all that actually settled. They stopped having that constant fear, and they started to actually feel that community, that yes, we are all close to death. We are all at risk of, disease, illness, old age, death, all the obvious things. And that's okay, because the sense of community was so strong that that's actually what was giving the, giving them the deep satisfaction. It was that strong community sense that everyone was sharing, that direct knowledge of the inevitability of death, right? That's around you all the time in nature. And what struck me is, and I don't know if they said it exactly this way, but what they realized is that what we use is this surrogate of safety. We think we're giving ourselves safety, but we're giving ourselves an illusion, and the illusion is so uncomfortable. The illusion is totally uncomfortable. So at some point with this process of realization, you will come back into communion with death. You have to. You have to live it, like day to day, moment to moment, face to face with death. I don't know how that sounds to people. I mean, I know it could sound really scary. It could sound off, or it could sound morbid or something, but it's not. It's true. You're all going to die. We're all going to die in pretty short order in the grand cosmic scheme of things, right? How fast did the last 10 years of your life go by? How fast are the next 10, 20, 30 years going to go by? it's going to be a flash of lightning, right? So this is literally ashes, dust, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. It's beautiful, right? So at some point, through all these emotion portals, we come to this beautiful communion with death. And you'll never fully live. You will never fully live until you're willing to fully die. Right now, again and again and again and again. And it's a process. It's literally a process of living and dying all the time. Yeah. You know, there are these, I don't know what you call it, like positive affirmation, feel good sort of things, you know, that you've probably heard. I remember years ago hearing them, but they never worked. One was like, if you want to feel gratitude, just ask yourself, how would you live if you knew this was your last day of your life? But I was so in my head, I couldn't actually do that. There's no way I would try, but it didn't really work. And I just still felt anxiety and all that. But now in communion with death, like that's actually true. It's actually true. Like I'm living my best day for sure. For sure. No, I don't have a doubt about it. I'm living the best day I could possibly live right now. Because I'm dying. Yeah. And it's simple and it's natural and it welcomes everything, right? What do you need to hide anymore from yourself or from others when you're like on death's bed right now? Alma had a beautiful thing she said when the sort of no self-realization came through, and she said, I feel like I'm a newborn baby and a corpse at the same time all the time. It's pretty accurate. There's this like beautiful innocence and exuberance of being alive, and I'm also just, everything's gone. It's gone, gone. All accumulation, all wealth, all knowledge, gone. All of your experiences gone. All your spiritual, experience library gone. How does that feel? Scary, exhilarating? Does it cause anger? What does it trigger? Those are your portals. Those are your entry points, right? Maybe I should do more death meditations because, yeah.
I've been using an app on the phone for quite a while called We Croak. It randomly reminds you 3 or 4 times a day that you're going to die, and then it comes up with a little quote about death, So,